Hey, public speaking, this is Mr. Kim. Uh, Please bear with me as we try our first virtual lesson. I thought since we're going to be out for a while, and I'm not entirely sure how long we'll be out, it would be a good idea for us to do lessons and slides. And I could just put up the slides on Classroom, but honestly, I think that some things, and I do try to spell it out literally within the actual slides, some things would be better if I elaborated in person. And obviously, since we can't be in the classroom, this was the best option I had. All right, now I know on the slides it says do now, but really we can't do nows. So I'm just gonna dictate the question to you, and I'm gonna explore each angle. So please follow along. Now I wrote, is it better to be relatable or inspiring when you're giving a speech? Um, Now, a lot of people, when they see this question, they think, you know what? Oh, it's better that you're inspiring. Um, because you want people to see the end goal of what you're talking about. You want people to see, what they need to achieve at the end of their journey, rather than, let's commiserate a little bit. And then sometimes that's definitely true. There are definitely merits to both being relatable and being inspiring. I would say, honestly, from experience, and I'll give you an example. So, in October, I think it was November, in no, maybe it was October. In October last year, I was asked to go back to Rutgers to give a speech to current student teachers who would, at the end of this year, well, frankly, I think at the end of this year, I don't know how the entire program's getting affected by college classes effectively being shut down. But the essential goal was for me to go there with a couple other former student teachers who are now current teachers like myself, and answer questions and give a couple little speeches to the current class of future English teachers at Rutgers. I was really excited to do this because I had a really great experience at Rutgers with my program, and I wanted to give back. I wanted to share. I remember at a certain point during the speech, the content was very relatable, which is very understandable. The entire process to become a teacher can be a little exhausting. To give you some reference, we have to take a test called the EdTPA. We basically pay $300 to do a whole bunch of monotonous video recording lessons and pages of material, and we get it evaluated the most inefficient way by a team of inefficient people, and it's kind of an arbitrary score that they still don't really know if it really counts or not. It's confusing. So we want it to be relatable in the sense of, oh yeah, we know what that's like, we know that's exhausting, don't worry about it, it's just part of the process. But on the flip side, we have things like, now don't get me wrong, I honestly think that it's important to share how you're feeling about, oh man, things can be really tough, or it's really exhausting. And don't get me wrong, teaching, as much as I love it, can be really exhausting, and sometimes it can be a little, let's call it emotionally challenging. Uh, I remember, because it was me and two or three other teachers, and they were asking us questions about like lifestyle and workload and emotional toll and administration. And the other teachers, they were trying to be relatable, but at the same time, I was looking at the audience, and I could tell that they were getting kind of off put by how negative some of the answers were, even though the goal was to be relatable. I think they weren't showing the student teachers how teaching can be really great when it's done correctly and when things just kind of match and line up. Nothing's perfect, obviously. So I remember at a certain point I stepped in and I just said, I just want to say, like, listen, teaching is really hard. It's true, there are a lot of ups and downs. I've had something of a year myself, but at the end of the day, I really, really love it. It's amazing. Like, if you can even just help one student, that's awesome, phenomenal. And, through this job, you can help so many different, and I basically, I decided in that moment, it's better to be inspiring rather than relatable. Because yes, it's important to commiserate, it's important to share emotions and feelings, but sometimes you have to consider what your audience needs. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about audience and demographic. So when you're done with this video, hit the next slide. Okay, so when discussion of audience and demographics. Now, I have the definition up here for you guys to look at. Demographics being a particular section of population, race, gender, sexuality, age, occupation, yada, yada, yada. You guys can read. I don't have to go through that myself. So basically, the things I want to really stress about audience demographics, you as a speaker are constantly doing like 1,000 little different things. Obviously, you're giving a speech. You're trying to hit points that you have either prepared yourself or someone has helped prepare. You want to present a certain image of yourself, whether it's body language, whether it's energy, heck, whether it's even clothing. We talked about clothing and appearance in the past before in class. I didn't actually think it could be made even more relevant, but the current situation we're in is definitely made it more relevant. Especially in terms of, I'll give you an example. I don't know if any of you saw the video Mr. Diaz put out yesterday, but he was clearly at his house. I'm assuming it was his house, anyways. And he was wearing clothes that seemed casual enough, but he wasn't in pajamas or like a big old sweatshirt and wearing like a silly t-shirt. He had like a collar shirt on, if I remember correctly. He had something that looked fairly presentable, but at the same time casual. On a certain level, that's what I chose to do. Now, I'm not wearing something super formal, but I'm not super casual either. Just to be clear, I literally changed out of my sweatshirt and casual setup, and I put on something that seems a little more formal, but at the same time is fairly casual. Because at the end of the day, you really want to consider what the audience needs from you. Sometimes they need a sense of casualness, aka your clothing. Sometimes they need a sense of emotion, especially with the current crisis. And here, if you notice, I'm pausing when I say the word crisis because maybe crisis is too strong of a word. Maybe that's not what the American public or my audience, at least what I'm perceiving my audience, needs to hear. Maybe instead of saying crisis, I should say something like situation. Situation can definitely be amped up to something like crisis, but it doesn't have to be that way. I'm getting a little off topic, so I'm gonna move back to the focal point of what I want to talk about here. Now, you as a speaker have an obligation to make things relatable, make things comprehensible to your audience. They need to be able to understand what you're saying, both what you're saying and the emotion that you want to elicit from what you're saying. But at the same time, you can only do so much as a speaker. Sometimes certain things are out of your hand. A really good example of this is age. Now, I don't know if any of you have leadership roles or positions with people who are significantly of different age than you, but just picture this for a second. Let's say you are the leader of a band, and in your band, you have a couple people younger than you, but then you have like 2 or 3 people who are like 10 or 15 years older than you. Now, you might be super qualified to be a band leader, you might have all the musical skills, you might know every instrument down like that, but at the same time, I'd be lying if I said, even if you were the best musician in the world, the people who are older than you might struggle to really respect and listen to you, even if everything you're saying is perfect. And now, this is a little bit of a generalization, sometimes it doesn't really matter, but I'd be lying if I said it doesn't ever come up. And the reason I use this example is because it's an example that I'm familiar with. I was part of a band in college, and I did a church band thing for the last, 6, 7, something like that years. And many times I had to lead people who were significantly older than me. It ranged from like 4 or 5 years, but then some people were like 30 or 40 years older than me. And I could definitely tell that even though I got my stuff together and I prepared things as I need to, sometimes it was hard for the older people in the band to really take me seriously, and that's something you have to consider as a public speaker. Age is a big factor, relationship is a big factor. Um, when I say class in the slides, I'm referring to social class, but it might even help to consider people in your own class. So this is a big thing when you're talking about audience and demographics. Okay, so an excellent extension of what we just talked about is this really important fact. Now, in terms of consistency, sometimes it really helps to deliver a speech the same way all the time. But you have to really think about that, because sometimes, to put this in perspective, there are certain lessons that I will teach the same way for multiple classes and multiple semesters. I try not to change something too specific because I feel like it really works one time. But there are other times where I think, you know what? I don't think this period would appreciate it as much as last period did. Or I don't think this semester's group of kids would appreciate the same way last semester's group of kids would connect to it. And, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you might be thinking, for things like lessons, for example, well, why don't you teach it the same way? Well, great example is this situation. So, last semester, I had maybe like 12 to 14, 15-ish kids per period for public speaking, but this semester I have literally 4 students per period. So there are certain activities, certain examples that I can't use as effectively because sometimes they're just more suited for larger classes and smaller classes. And here it just doesn't really apply as well. So I talked about age really briefly last slide, and things like class and gender and relationships, but even size of the audience is really important. Okay, so in keeping with our discussion of audience and demographics, I thought a good way that we could expand upon this is practice. Now, I'm sure most of you know this, but for those of you who don't, jury selection is a good connection to audience demographics because when you're called to serve on a jury, you have to answer a couple of questions and basically, I don't want to call them tests and trials, but a series of qualifiers to determine if you are fit to serve on a jury. Usually speaking, it'll just be questions on, like how would you react to certain situations, and et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes it's schedule-based or job-based or like where you come from based. And I mean that in terms of class or job and less of race or gender. But on one aspect, jury selection does involve considering appearance. And I want to talk about both appearance and how it factors into audience and demographics with this example. So let's go through this one together. And please pay attention to how I'm doing this here because your exit ticket for this lesson is in 2 parts. It'll be at the end of the slideshow, and you're going to have to explain things in a similar fashion how I'm explaining them here. So let's say we're picking members from a jury, and the case is you are defending a young minority who stole from a grocery store. Now, let's go through these 3 people because based on just appearance and your opinion, you need to tell me which one of these 3 people do you want to eliminate. And on the flip side, which one of these people do you want to keep on the jury? Let's say most and least. Okay, so let's go through each of these people. Now, in terms of audience and demographic, we have to obviously look at appearance, but we have to consider demographic too. So if we're breaking down categories and groups of things, let's look at our young minority yourself from a grocery store now. I'm saying he. It could be a she. I don't really know for sure. This is a hypothetical example. So we have age and we have race. It's really about it. So if we look at each of these 3 people, let's start with the lady on the left. Now, she definitely is not young. She is maybe middle age, 30-ish, maybe I'd say, maybe 35, 40, something like that. So, there isn't a connection in terms of age, but she is a minority. So we have a connection in terms of being able to relate on a minority level. It's something to consider. And again, maybe there are deeper facts that we don't know. Maybe something about her history or her job or something would make her more or less likely to sympathize with our young minority. I don't know. We're talking about appearance, because as much as I hate saying this, when you are giving a speech, sometimes you get blurbs about members of your audience and what they're like and where they come from. Sometimes you get like a general blurb about the entire audience, but let's be honest, more often than not, you don't really know exactly who's in your audience when you give a speech. Very, very important. Sometimes we have to just go off appearance, even though that's kind of bad. It's something that is a big part of public speaking. Now let's look at our guy in the middle. He's wearing a suit. He's got a nice smile on. He's a minority. He's young. I would probably say out of the three people here, I would want this guy the most for my jury, because he probably, just appearance-wise, shares the most qualities with our young minority grocery store defendant. Now, guy to the right, okay, he is older. He is not a minority. He's white. I would probably say out of the three people, I want him the least, because I don't think he shares a lot of qualities with my young minority who sold from a grocery store. Now, let's be super clear here. I'm going off appearance and snap judgments, not deeper facts. Maybe the guy on the right works with inner city kids, and because of his experience with that, maybe he is super sympathetic to these sort of cases. Maybe the guy in the middle is kind of a snob and decides, they had a choice. They chose to steal, which frankly is terrible, because the devil is in the details. But again, we're going off appearance, which is largely what most public speakers have to work with whenever they give a speech. Something to consider. Okay, so for the last point I want to make today, I want to talk about dealing with less relatable audiences and demographics. Sometimes you're really lucky. Sometimes you have exactly the right audience you want to talk to. You have the right setup. You have the right topics. It just clicks. But sometimes you don't have that relatability and connection. Let's say, hypothetically, you are a new boss at a company, or you're some sort of new supervisor, and you're trying to speak to all these people, but you're young. Maybe the people in the audience don't want to listen to you as much because you're not as experienced as they are, simply because of age or how long people have worked there. Maybe people in the audience don't want to listen to you as much because of your gender. I know that's kind of weird, a small thing, but I've definitely seen that happen before. Maybe level of education could be a thing. Some people feel a little weird if you have more education than they do. So sometimes it makes them feel like, oh, well, this person, they don't, are they above me? Should I feel like lower than they are? And obviously that's ridiculous. Level of education doesn't automatically mean you're better qualified or you're a better judge of whatever topic you're discussing. But it does stick in some people's minds, so you have to think about that. So one thing you have to worry about, worry is the wrong word, one thing you have to consider with audiences that might be less relatable to you and vice versa, is you should try to anticipate what they might be thinking. Think about the disconnects. Think about the demographics that don't match up. To give you an example, there are some people in certain professions that feel that having a master's degree is really, really important, and maybe you are not able to do your job as effectively or be as credible if you don't have a master's degree for whatever field you're in. So, for example, in teaching, that's a big thing, because teachers, a lot of them want to go back and get their master's if they haven't received it before they start teaching. And sometimes it can be a point of contention with teachers who are unable to go back and get their master's. Because let's be honest, school costs money. And it might, from there, you might hit a point of, well, oh man, this person could afford a master's, and their parents, paid for grad school for them, so they're not gonna relate to me because I've been struggling my whole life, and oh man, it's a wealth thing. They're not going to understand how I feel. Now, I'm dramatizing a little bit, and for the record, this is totally hypothetical. I'm not pulling anything off from real experiences that I know of per se, but it definitely is something that you have to consider. So, a couple things you have to be aware of. One, and I cannot stress this enough, don't try too hard to be relatable. Sometimes you're not going to be the perfect relatable speaker. Sometimes people are just going to kind of dislike you when you speak. Now, hopefully, that'll very rarely be the case. I have to stress that if you do your job well as a public speaker, and you utilize tips and techniques that we've gone over in class, you probably will do a good job. So to that end, be professional, be polite, be approachable. Those are really important things. If you can, try to find some area of relatability. And if you consider all those things, if you think about the things that might upset your audience or might automatically make them not want to listen to you as much, if you keep that in mind and you work towards that, sometimes it really, really helps. But nothing is perfect. You have to be aware of this. Okay, so for the next 2 slides, they're not lesson slides per se. I want you to be able to practice the stuff we've talked about today and to be able to explain it. So, similar to the example I showed you guys before this slide, there are 2 jury selection, real-life scenario, hypothetical scenario slides. Those 2 slides with the questions attached are part of your exit ticket for today's lesson. The exit ticket is due to, let's say, tomorrow night. I want you guys to have a little time, breathing room to do this because any of other classes too. But please make sure that when you're doing them, you answer in as much detail as you can. All right? So work on the next 2 slides for your exit ticket, and I will see you guys Wednesday for the next lesson. Thanks.